afterwards. Geraldine's going to speak for around about 50 minutes or so, something like that. And then we're going to base the webinar after that around the answers to Geraldine's 2 questions you've sent in. There were lots of answers, thank you. Much appreciated. And the questions that you share now. So keep them coming throughout. The chat is enabled. You can share with all, you can share with me, and I'll manage that. And Geraldine, you and I can sort of, as it were, touch base after your input and after you've looked at some of those answers that came in. And then we're going to finish with some conclusions from Geraldine and a little bit of group coaching. Geraldine's promise, which I'm looking forward to. So Geraldine herself is an executive leadership coach and mentor, a psychologist by training. She started her career in the public sector, moving on to FMCG and financial services, in global roles in talent management, exec development, and others with Standard Chartered Bank, where she worked very closely with the executive leadership team. So Geraldine, thank you ever so much for doing this, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining me for this 45 minutes. I have to say I am experiencing some social anxiety because I haven't actually connected with so many people since the lockdown. So anyway, what I'm hoping to do is to raise some new insights and questions about leadership in this era from this conversation and offer you my experiences and reflections just in the spirit of curiosity, nothing else. So as I begin, I just want to invite you to consider how present you want to be during this 45 minutes on a scale of 1 to 5 and 1 being high, 5 being high. And then to ask yourself, what will it take for you to remain at that level of presence? And if you're feeling particularly distracted or stressed, then maybe just a few deep breaths in your own time, knowing that as you breathe out, you're just letting go of all the external noise and clutter, so that your brain has a chance to think clearly and calmly while meeting your colleagues here today. I have 3 major propositions about a new era of leadership in our virtual world to share with you. The first one is that leaders need to become an effective team coach and with a well-developed coaching mindset, focusing specifically on building team dynamics, so shifting away from the work itself. Just to get on the same page as we start, this coaching mindset has 4 main components. 4 main components, actually. Listening for feelings as well as facts, asking open questions to explore others' thinking, enabling this thinking to evolve safely, which means not giving advice, and empowering the team to solve their own problems and decide what they want to do next rather than be directive. So what are the right conversations to help build high team performance? I'm sure we've all got some really interesting reflections and observations, but I'm going to take a lead from good old Boris and refer to the science and the data. I'm going to take you back to the groundbreaking research by Google in 2015. They set out to find an algorithm that could determine the best mix of personality traits and attributes for a high-performing team, but this didn't transpire. Instead, they found it was how the team interacted and not the people on the team that contributed to high performance. I'm actually going to say that again. It was how the team interacted and not the people on the team that contributed to high performance. The meta-analysis identified 5 key clusters of interactions, and there's no big surprises here for the first 4. Structure and clarity, roles and responsibilities, and what do we collaborate on? Dependability, do we all do what we say we're going to do? Meaning, does my work help me develop and grow and feel fulfilled? And impact, are we making progress we can celebrate? Are we doing work that matters for the organisation? However, it was the 5th cluster that came as a surprise at the time, and you may recall what that was. It was the most significant factor for high performance in teams, and it was psychological safety. Feeling safe to speak up and be honest, particularly about mistakes, being able to challenge the team, and I would add, feeling included and relevant. So if this new leadership era requires being a team coach, then this needs to start with building psychological safety. And those organisations today that have invested well in inclusive practices will already have established a good foundation to build on. I must say, though, that these insights have come as quite a shock to the leaders that I'm coaching, as many of them are playing the hero leader right now and adopting either a command and control position or an advice monster position with a mistaken belief that this will quicken things up or take the burden off the team. Of course, this style has its place, but my proposition is it needs to run alongside appropriate coaching conversations that empower the team to build their new ways of working, and with psychological safety as the first priority. So why does this research particularly matter now? Well, as your teams have gone virtual and working from home, there's a whole new set of life challenges to deal with. On this basis, it's very unlikely that the dynamics within the team that were in place before the lockdown have not in some way been disturbed. So teams are trying to find a new equilibrium and establishing new norms of behaviour with each other and with their leader. So if how the team interacts is the biggest predictor of high performance, then my proposition is that your leaders' conversations should take much more of a coaching focus to explore and understand and enable the team to build new dynamics under their new circumstances. There's plenty of advice around about how to build psychological safety, so I'm not going to repeat that here, but it might be worth reminding you of the most impactful question that Google found for psychological safety, and they introduced this at the time in all their teams. And this question was, what risks have you taken since the last meeting? And I would add to this, what risks do we need to take and what safety do we need to create? Since a coaching mindset is all about asking the right questions, then I have developed a top 10 question list, which is going to be available in the additional resources. There's nothing magical about the questions, but they create magic if they're genuinely asked as open questions. And I'm just going to share a few of them. What are you feeling? Which should replace how are you today? What is important for us to discuss today? Which could replace a set agenda that's been pre-given. What can we stop doing? Requesting going the extra mile needs to be balanced with this question right now. What have we overlooked? This lets the team raise blind spots and also brings in late thinkers who are not yet convinced with the majority, but usually stay quiet. And what is the one thing I can do differently to support you? And hopefully leaders will be prepared to be surprised with the information that they're giving. This is the essence of a coaching mindset that's focused on building effective team dynamics in a virtual world. I'm not asking you to be convinced, but I am asking you to be thoughtful and reflect and perhaps match with your own observations of what you see making a difference with high performing teams right now. And you might like to share some of that when we have a conversation. So my second proposition around a new era of leadership is the communications that's needed right now in our virtual world. I've seen many CEOs really make an effort to communicate differently, and particularly messages about please take care of yourself and your families first and then focus on the business. Many have also used the magic well-being word. This sets a huge tone from the top and expectations that the rhetoric will be followed up with relevant actions. It will be a whole new session to discuss what proactive well-being solutions look like that are not advice sheets, but we won't go there today. What I do want to touch on is the well-researched wisdom on effective communications that seems so relevant now. This is research that was conducted by the Gallup organization over 3 years to 2008. This was groundbreaking research at the time, as it looked at a random sample of more than 10,000 followers globally. The research was anchored around the following key question: what leader has the most positive influence in your daily life? And then list 3 words that best describe what this person contributes to your life. Of course, there was a bit more to it than that, but that's just to give you the gist of it. The results ended up challenging the conventional wisdom at the time on leadership that was espousing purpose, wisdom, humour, and humility. None of these featured in the top list from followers. And instead, as many of you may know or remember, their 4 basic needs are trust, stability, hope, and the fourth one, which I believe needs to be particularly dialed up now, is compassion. In 2008, compassion was not a fashionable word to associate with effective leadership. The research found associated words such as caring, friendship, happiness, and love as part of this compassion. And there was also a realistic expectation from followers of more intimacy from their immediate managers than from more senior managers. I've noticed so many stories from leaders recently who've had real aha moments about compassion, and maybe you have too. Only yesterday, one of my coaches, who's a senior lawyer, said that whilst he sits in a comfortable house with his family, he has one team member who's in a bedsit in London and many miles from his home country. And he's now the team member that he's most concerned about and wants to offer the most support to. Another leader said, I never realized how different everybody was when we were in the office together. We all sort of show up looking the same and sounding the same. We sit in the same environment. But now when I see people sitting at home in different clothes and with different surroundings and telling me their different stories, I just realize how different everybody is that I never realized before. And this has opened up a whole new world for me as a leader. And I really need to think about how to respond and support each one differently. A KPMG senior partner last week, who surprisingly said to me he's advocating letting those staff who want to identify themselves as feeling isolated during the lockdown coming into the office first so that they can have more social contact, irrespective of the job they do. So why does this research on communications matter now? Well, because we're all asking our leaders to be thoughtful and maybe step up their communication, but they may need more help than this. And so you now have 4 key touch points to think about. How are they building trust, hope, stability, and compassion? And if you're thinking, well, it's a bit difficult now to build hope and stability with the current circumstances, then this research, which you might want to dip into, explains really clearly that it's important to give some kind of future focus to communication so that people have something to aspire to that gives them optimism about coming out of any crisis or challenge, and that they can see their leader is looking to the future for them, even if they feel stuck. I think that's possible. So, my third and final proposition that's emerged from my own work with teams is the one I'm surprised probably not to see commented on more yet on social media. This is the leader's responsibility now to understand how they can shape and support a new organisation culture that's going to be fit for the future. As the HR director, I'm very well aware that you're expected to understand and observe how the culture of your organisation can be described and what helps and hinders business performance. Also, how you can go beyond espoused values to effect a culture change. So what I've noticed is that teams that have gone virtual and started to cope with the lockdown have changed or shifted their norms of behaviour. It's these norms of behaviour that really define the culture of the organisation now. So I'm just wondering, are you noticing how these norms are shifting so that you can capitalise on those you believe are shifting for the better, and you can try and deter those that you think might be destructive for the future? I'm beginning to see that this is a unique space for HR directors to step into right now. And just to close, I've noticed some interesting changes that teams have reported themselves that I'm working with that's really underpinned some of these big shifts. There's 3 of them. The first one is the question of prioritising that always seemed impossible for them before the lockdown has now become much easier to do, maybe as a basic survival instinct. The silo mentality has been broken down, as there seems to be a view that everyone's in this mess together and the only way out is to find ways to help each other. And thirdly, we've tracked a team before and through the lockdown with our wellbeing survey. And as expected, their scores that we were improving with some bespoke interventions before the lockdown have taken a dip. But they didn't go down to their lowest level before we started working with them. And as we've talked to them about this, they put this down to two main reasons. Firstly, a feeling of care and support from their colleagues. And secondly, just a feeling that there's more openness now about well-being, and the openness itself is impacting their well-being scores. So engaging leaders in understanding your shifting norms of behaviour, I believe, is a key part of this new era of leadership. So Richard, they're my three propositions: a coaching mindset focusing on team dynamics, communication with a focus on compassion, and rewarding shifting norms of behaviour that will build a culture that's fit for the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Geraldine. That's terrific. So a lot of food for thought there. We've not got questions through yet, which I suspect is because people are listening to you, which is fair enough. I'd be the same, I have to say. So if you'd like to feed some through now, while that goes on, Geraldine, the answers we got, were there things that stuck out for you, that there were particular trends in some of the answers to your questions?
There was quite a bit. It reinforced the compassion point for sure. There was quite a lot about it's important to get to know people, it's important to care about people, it's important to provide support for people. I think that was the main theme that came through. Actually, a lot of people were very honest and said, I don't really know yet. I thought that was great. I'm not really sure what we want our leaders to stop doing or start doing. We're just kind of still understanding what's going on. I think, you know, and of course it will be like that because things are changing so rapidly. That was really the main two themes that I picked up, Richard, to be honest.
What's your advice while we wait for some better questions than mine to come through? What's your advice for people who are struggling with the uncertainty at leadership level? Or put it another way, how would you cope a leader who feels it's their job to be the certain one? Because I bet there's a lot of that around.
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting conversation, because that's potentially a belief that that they carry with them. Perhaps it's based on how they've been seen to be successful in the past. Maybe they're a technical expert and, their success has been based on kind of having the answers. And maybe they've built some team dependency on them being an expert. And now, of course, when everything's changing, there isn't a rule book, there isn't past experience to draw on. And my advice to that person is actually don't wing it, and for God's sake, don't give any bullshit. A level of honesty and transparency and vulnerability is absolutely fine, because as we know, particularly from the David Meister work, that builds trust with your team. It'd be highly unlikely if your team was expecting you to know a lot of answers to things that they haven't got a clue about. But what the team might want to hear is that they're questions that you're thinking about. They're questions that are on your mind. There's, this is going to take time to build up our answers to, but I just want you to know that they're questions I'm thinking about. And, I appreciate you guys might not have the time to think about them, but, I feel like I've got some responsibility to think about them. I just think I think honesty genuinely is the best policy.
Well, talking of which, I think that's going to come out in the next. We've got 4 questions in, which are they're not related, but they're not a million miles away from each other. How different is the support leaders need to give, would you say, Geraldine, for employees who are working and those who have been furloughed?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I mean, I've no experience of this at all, so compassion comes to mind. So I mean, you guys would be giving some advice, I guess, but for those that have been furloughed, I'm sure you wouldn't want their leader to just not have any conversations with them at all. So there may be a routine that's agreed about some kind of check-in with them. You may have the opportunity to offer them some other support, some kind of emotional support or well-being support, particularly if you think that's not one of the leader's strengths. I'm sure you don't necessarily want the HR team picking up that work or those conversations. But I was having a conversation just this morning with a CEO, and it wasn't someone who'd been furloughed, but it was somebody who, for different reasons, probably did need some support. and wasn't getting anything. And I think that just makes people, particularly in lockdown, really emotionally vulnerable. So there needs to be something that's on offer for them, and some conversation that encourages them to get some help or guidance, whether it's employee assistance, some counselling, or if you think it works in your culture, you could potentially do some introductions and some buddying. I mean, that can sometimes help. Some peer support can help. It doesn't always have to be one-to-one. People might volunteer to go into a group. Lots of people go into groups for support and help. That might be a more effective way, or efficient way, not effective, a more efficient way of doing it. It's quite, you know, it's a very sensitive and personalized thing, but definitely some support for sure.
Well, talking of which, and again related, I guess, is perhaps your keynote here is compassion. Where do we go about giving people hope when we don't know what's going to happen in the longer term about jobs? Some of the things that are coming out about the predictions of the economy are really quite serious. Even we might get a U-turn, we might get a V-turn next year, who knows? But for now, there could be some quite nasty storms ahead. Even yeah. So what's the keynote to strike, would you say, Geraldine?
There has to be some optimism. So, you know, for everyone that's doom and gloom about economies and what's going on in the world, there are some people who are slightly more optimistic. I've heard some of you this morning say, actually, we're really busy. You know, we haven't had a lot of suppliers or customers going under yet. It may happen. But the important thing in the research, they said, was that even if you can't give optimistic messages, there is something about projecting an optimistic energy. There's a difference between a leader coming on the call and projecting doom and gloom, especially because they're seeing the leader, as opposed to a leader who's coming on and projecting a little bit of calmness, a little bit of optimism in some way, because there's some positivity around them. Because, you know, we all know it's not what people say, is it? It's all the non-verbal stuff. And I'm assuming it's video. Of course, if it's audio, it's more difficult. Then they have to be coached on what to say. But they have to find some type of optimistic message, even if the bigger picture is more pessimistic. They have to inject some optimism and some positivity at some level. There's lots of levels. I mean, you went to the sort of big macro level, but at micro levels, there must be some opportunity to project some optimism and positivity. That's really important. It's a good question for a leader. Yeah, sorry.
Well, similarly, I bet you come across, no, thank you, that's very good. I bet you come across this a lot in your coaching, I imagine. Showing vulnerability, leaders showing vulnerability. If it doesn't come naturally, what advice do you give to leaders in that position?
Just tell a story. Just tell any story. Any story is better than no story. So, you know, great to have you all on the call. I'm really interested what's happened to you this morning. You won't believe what's happened to me this morning. You know, dog jumped on the laptop and knocked the coffee over, and anything. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's actually about personal disclosure. And that level of, you know, if you go one level deeper, it's about vulnerability. But if you just start with some personal disclosure, then I would say to the leaders, so what does your team know about you? Do they just see the person at work, especially now? They just see you, you know, maybe in your suit, you know, reasonably formal. Have you ever told them about stuff that's really important to you? Have you ever asked them or shared with you what you did at the weekend? They've probably got this vision of you, you know, you're a walking and a reading guy, and they probably don't know you do Tai Chi in the mornings and you're actually a cake baker. You know, a lovely thing to do is to ask everyone, just share one thing about yourself that nobody knows, might make them laugh. You'd be amazed what people will share. So it is about sharing safe stuff to start with, but obviously you want to encourage leaders to share more vulnerable stuff. And I've done that on a video. I mean, we have to do all our team development work on videos now, but you know, you can do lovely little exercises with people where they have an opportunity to talk about themselves. Just 2 minutes. Just tell us a little bit about your life at home in lockdown. Just a couple of minutes. something unusual, something fun, something that's challenged you, something you've learnt, and suddenly this whole new world opens up. And if the leader does that as well, you can almost sense the energy shifting, just sense it shifting, because people just feel more intimate with each other, and that builds trust, and then it all sort of goes from there. It's really simple. It's really simple stuff to me.
Yeah. Sorry, shift of energy is a nice way of putting it. Is there a comparable approach you have when you're coaching a naturally transactional leader? As one question that puts it here, is that the temptation, I guess, for transactional leaders to get even more transactional when they're virtually removed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the online, the virtual stuff, it can overemphasize certain things we would prefer not to be emphasized, perhaps.
Yes. I've got a really live example of a leader that I'm coaching who she would say that she is very task focused, always gets stuff done, known to be an executor. And it was mentioned by the head of talent development to my project manager only yesterday. I'll call her Jane, who said they were talking about well-being work, but then she said, I must tell you about Jane. Jane's just kind of blown us all away in HR, because she's actually connecting with all of her team, and it's a big team, and she's having conversations about feelings. She's asking people, you know, the magic question. They've all had my magic questions. What are you feeling right now? She's probably said, how are you feeling? You know, how are you feeling right now? How are you feeling about the lockdown? And they said it's transformed her leadership brand and her sense of followership and trust. She did have it before because she was so competent, but that's partly not what's needed right now. It's really not about competence right now. I really believe it's about compassion and connection right now. So I would say, try and encourage your leader to do to make one small change in the way that they communicate with people. That has to be a question, not advice. That changes the dynamic of the conversation, and just encourage them. They've only got to ask one question and listen. They don't have to do anything else. And then ask them what they notice about it afterwards. And you can genuinely get somebody to do something in like a 2-week period. And I promise you, they come back and they say, wow, you know, that's made a big difference. And some people say, I never realized I didn't listen before. I haven't really heard this person speaking before. Very often people who are very transaction orientated can be a little bit more hands-on or a little bit more command and control. And that just is not helping people at the moment, because people don't feel, I always say right now, people need to feel listened to, cared for, and valued. And being the advice monster right now is not going to add to that at all. So it might just be as much as ask a question and listen, and then see what you make of it. But for goodness sake, again, I'm sorry this morning, this guy said to me at the end of an hour's session, he said, you know what, I've just realized the only thing I do in my conversation is talk about the work, because I'm too busy. I'm running from meeting to meeting to meeting. And I'm not making enough time to have a different conversation with people. So it's just asking that leader to shift a tiny bit in order to build that followership and engagement. Let's be honest. People are making decisions right now about whether they're going to go the extra mile or not, because their time is really precious now, and they're stressed, and they've got many other challenges going on. So I didn't talk about engagement because we're probably all engagement experts. But, you know, the pillars of engagement, I think, are now shifting. And I think if leaders don't latch on to the care, the listening, the compassion, they're going to miss building engagement in a different way. And you're going to find when you come out of this some disenchanted employees who just don't feel looked after. That's my proposition anyway. It's a really, really important time.
I'm just going to stay with this briefly, because although you may feel you've answered this, but there's a very nice exchange here, very perhaps nice isn't the right word, powerful maybe. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more of how you persuade, or have you persuaded, Geraldine, the most recalcitrant leader you've got who is not persuaded at all of the idea of disclosure or vulnerability. So I'm just going to start with a quick, nice little story saying somebody from saying our managing partner shared a recipe he'd written, sounded horrible to me, minced curry, but it had the whole firm talking about it. Good example of personal disclosure. So that's a nice way where it's worked. Thanks, Rachel. But then there's this exchange here is quite, I think, quite a moment. So really struggling with that disclosure or vulnerability piece at the moment, presumably how you get somebody to do that who's not sure, and then follow up. For leaders who are not used to coaching, beginning at a time like this, when they're under more pressure than ever, perhaps because of figures and so on, or actually because you're doing it remotely, and drawn to being more directive is a challenge. What advice do you have for leaders who are getting started with coaching at a time like this? How do you really persuade? How have you persuaded your most reluctant leader to engage with the sort of things you're talking about?
Yeah, well, thankfully, that's what keeps me in business, because you usually have to invite in someone to help facilitate the team. It's different virtually. It's different. I mean, if we were in normal circumstances, then I normally allow, let the team do their life stories with each other. It's quite a little structured exercise, and I always leave the leader who's reluctant to do it over dinner when everybody's a bit more relaxed. But sometimes you do need a facilitator, and sometimes you need to coach the leader to say, if you say to the leader, I just want you to speak for maybe 3 minutes about yourself, and here's one question, here's one thing you could say, something you've learned about 2 or 3 important things in your life that have really shaped who you are as a leader today. And they may have to rehearse it with you, and they've all got those stories. Those sorts of leaders have probably never actually been invited to share them before. So you could find a way, as the HR person, of course, you might be invited into the team meeting, and you could then facilitate everybody sharing something. And maybe the leader could go last. I think sometimes if the leader's heard everybody else, you can always set your extrovert thinkers up first. Put a few stooges to do the disclosure first and set the tone, and then others will follow. And then you say to the leader 2 things. First of all, gosh, I'm just wondering what you've learned listening to everyone in your team tell those stories. And what would you like to share? And then normally that, in my experience, that reluctance gets broken down. It doesn't always work if they go first. You probably need a stooge in the team to go first and set the tone. And just draw them in gently. When they realize it's safe because other people are doing it, then they might have a crack at it. That's my experience.
Quite like the term stooge there, Geraldine.
Yeah.
Are leaders under even more pressure to deliver the numbers and performance, which might make it more difficult to do, as we're suggesting here?
Well, yes. I can only go back to the only experience I can relate to, as I'm not in corporate life now, was when we went through the second financial crisis in Standard Chartered Bank. And we were under enormous pressure, as everybody was, to deliver the numbers. And I remember having a conversation with the CEO at the time, Peter Sands, and said, here's what's going to happen. You're going to put stress and pressure on everyone to deliver the numbers, and your leaders globally are going to go into being advice monsters and micromanage. That's what's going to happen, and you're going to set them up really well to do that. And you've got a decision. You can do that, or you can take a slightly different view, which is, if you believe that you've got competent people in your business, then you need to ask your leaders to step away from managing downwards right now and trust their teams that they know what they're doing. They might need some discussion and advice, but it's not about doing the work for the teams. Let them get on and run the business like they've been doing, but the challenges have changed. And their responsibility is to go sideways and outwards. In other words, to think about the trends, to think a little bit about how to plan for the future, to think about clients, key stakeholder relationships, reading, understanding, networking, predicting, managing the climate, managing the energy. But if they all step into doing the work instead of their teams and micromanaging, the whole place is going to grind to a halt. And I said, it's a risk. We've never done it before. And to his credit, he asked, in fact, Helen may have been there with me. Helen Mould is on the call. She was in Standard Chartered Bank with me. She may remember. I think it surprised everyone that Peter said, this is not the time to be hands-on and trying to manage the business. You've got people doing that for you. They've been doing it perfectly well before. You have a different role to play now. And he really got into the culture building and the support and the energy building and the advice. And he really encouraged them not to step into the advice monster space. And I say advice monster purposely. It's not always, of course, sometimes it's helpful. Of course it is. But in general, it's not helpful. There's no evidence that produces a better level of team performance. There is actually, it's the other way around. There's no evidence it produces that.
Well, clearly there's some people some leaders do step up to that, and their moment has come, and sometimes it's perhaps a surprise, perhaps as you were saying with Peter Sands there. There's a nice forward-thinking question here, though, where you see a change in leadership prompted by the crisis. But how do you help leaders to maintain the different and more compassionate approach that they've achieved when the crest of the crisis has passed?
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about that. That's always a signal. If you've asked a good question, people shift their whole body. I guess you guys know that, but that's a really good indicator. It's like the whole system changes. I've got to reset myself to answer this one. It's why you need people on video, because it helps a lot. Well, it's probably, again, facilitating a conversation with the leader and their team, where the team can say, this is what we found really helpful during the lockdown. This is what we really found really helpful from you when you did more of this. And maybe a conversation with the team to say, so how do we carry that forward? You know, how do we carry that forward? So the leader doesn't have to do all the thinking. You know, you can get the team to coach the leader rather than the leader feel they've got to make all the decisions and make all the changes. I think if you facilitate the team to have a conversation with the leader, then the leader can hear, you know, it's like that question, the magic question, what's the one thing after lockdown, you know, what's the one thing I need to do more of to help you to be successful? Or what's the one thing I need to do less of to help you to be successful? Hello, someone, we have a young joiner to the network. Wonderful. So that would be my advice, is explore it, be open about it, involve the team with the leader to understand what was helpful and what wasn't helpful, make it kind of an open discovery session, really.
I like the one thing we can help to be successful is a nice question. We have one more question, then we were hoping to do some bit of group coaching. We'll see how you feel about that in terms of time. But someone's asked, are you seeing CEOs struggling with their own emotive response, impacting their ability to lead?
Yes. Well, you would expect me to say, I said yes very quickly, didn't I? Yes is the quick answer. Yes, I don't know how to answer that, because I had to have as Helen knows, I talk about courageous conversations quite a lot. So I had a courageous conversation with the CEO this week, and we were reviewing that. We had a call this morning. Well, did you say emotive? This is about managing their emotions. Yeah, okay. So being a CEO is a very lonely place to be, as is being an HR director, by the way. I think both of those roles are extraordinarily lonely, because, you know, you have to observe a unique space of kind of independence and objectivity. I would put the HRD, you know, alongside the CEO in that respect. So it could be the same thing for an HRD. I just genuinely think when it comes to emotional health, you need a safe place to go and dump it, to talk about it, to be open about it, to acknowledge it. And it may not be your partner, because some you don't necessarily want to dump, if I can be blunt, you don't want to dump your emotional baggage always with your partner, because they may be struggling as well. I think you need to go to an objective, safe place. It doesn't have to be a coach. I mean, you, for example, Richard, you very kindly set up a buddying system, right? I know my buddies on this call. I've got a wonderful buddy, and we have helpfully been exchanging, I would say, emotional stuff. So you could say, well, CEO's not going to do that, are they? Well, they may have in their network, they may have somebody that they talk to. If not, then they probably do need a coach. I'm not pitching for coaching. It could be a mentor. It could be you, the HR director, right? If there's one safe place that a CEO should go to talk, I would say it's with their HR director. And I think that's, in my experience, that's a real measure of trust. If they do feel that they can, that they can talk to you. I wasn't an HR director. I was running OD. I wasn't an HR director. I was head of OD for a number of years. And the then CEO, Mervyn Davies, I used to get a phone call about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I could see it was him on my phone, and I knew what it was. He'd say, Geraldine, are you free? And of course, you're not going to say, come up and have tea with me, he'd say. Come and have tea. And I knew that it wasn't really tea. It was him just wanting to sit and have a conversation with somebody that he felt safe with. And I tell you this in the spirit of Chatham House rules, because when he left the bank, he said in front of many people, the wonderful thing about Geraldine was she was one of the few people that would challenge me. And I never remember challenging him. I would just remember sitting there listening to him and drinking tea with him and just listening. I don't remember. He remembered it as challenge. I just remembered it as listening. And I've never forgotten that. I've always thought the art of listening means so much more to the other person, particularly powerful people who just interpret it as a safe place to process for themselves. It's a remarkable thing that I learnt from many years ago. Sorry if that was a long answer to the question. It was a bit of a stream of consciousness, but it's just taken me back to those experiences.
No, it's telling a story, and it was very apposite and not at all wandering, not a bit of it. We have actually got to the end of the webinar, 2:45, and the quality of the questions and the quality of your responses has not left us time to do the group coaching. But what I'm thinking is that if people wanted to stay on, if you're all right with this, Geraldine, and then if you wanted to finish off with that, if people have to move on, that's absolutely fine too, of course. Would that be okay? And if people have meetings and so on, please do.
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that, but equally, I'm just going to pose 2 or 3 key questions for people that are locking off. Just the questions that might be worth thinking about. So, how will you go about creating the conversations to have the influence that you want to have over the next few weeks? A great conversation with your business partner or your CEO might be, so what are you noticing? What are you noticing? I'm wondering, how is your CEO creating psychological safety with his own or her own executive team? And what do you need to role model right now that sets you apart from an existing norm of behavior, but enables others to see you trying to role model a shift that you think will be helpful for the future? How do you see your unique space in your organization changing over the next couple of months? In other words, what is it that you can do and influence that nobody else can do, because this is your unique space? And I think finally, I'd say, how can you use coaching techniques every day that will enable you to help other people see the value of them? And, I'd be delighted to stay in touch and continue the conversation with anybody now, or afterwards in any shape or form you like. I really, really hope that this has given you just a little bit of food for thought, if only time to have a space to breathe and reflect. Thank you so much, everyone.